Ananya Sharma was just 24 when her dream of studying fashion in New York turned into a nightmare. To her family in India, she was the pride of their home, the girl who had made it to one of the biggest cities in the world. But on a winter night in Queens, Ananya was found dead in her apartment, her life officially declared a suicide. What no one could explain were the disturbing details that followed: unanswered emails, secret withdrawals, and a mysterious man named David Miller whose presence in her final days raised chilling questions. In the summer of 2019, a young Indian woman named Ananya Sharma arrived in New York City with dreams bigger than the skyline. She had earned a scholarship to study fashion design, a field she was deeply passionate about. To her family and friends back in Delhi, she was an inspiration, someone who had worked hard and finally reached the place where opportunities were endless. Her photographs on social media showed her standing in front of Times Square, walking near Central Park, and smiling with classmates at her college. On the surface, it looked like she was living the life so many imagined for themselves. But the picture was incomplete. Behind the bright images, Ananya's life in New York was far from easy. She rarely called home, and when she did, her conversations were short and hurried. Her eyes in photos seemed tired, her expressions slightly forced. The excitement of her early days slowly faded into something quieter, something her friends back home could not quite understand. Her silence became more noticeable, but no one suspected the darkness she was hiding. On a freezing December night, everything changed. Ananya was found lifeless in her small Queens apartment. The police treated it as a suicide. No note was discovered, and her room was strangely neat, as if nothing unusual had happened. Neighbors said they heard noises just before midnight, a few thuds, but nothing that suggested danger. Within hours, newspapers carried the shocking story: Indian woman found dead in New York apartment. The official reports were simple, even cold. Her death was ruled a suicide, and the case was closed. For her family, the explanation was impossible to accept. They described Ananya as determined and full of ambition. She had spoken of designing her own label, of working hard and making them proud. Nothing in her past gave a reason for such an ending. Their disbelief pushed the story beyond headlines, into questions that refused to be silenced. Investigators who took a second look found troubling details. Ananya had been working multiple part-time jobs to pay her rent and living expenses. Her scholarship covered tuition, but the high cost of life in New York left her constantly struggling. Her bank records showed frequent cash withdrawals that did not match her usual spending. Even more alarming were threatening emails traced to an anonymous sender. The language was sharp, filled with pressure and intimidation, pointing to someone who knew her well. CCTV footage from her building revealed another layer of mystery. Just 2 nights before her death, a man named David Miller, an older contact she had met at a networking event, was seen entering her apartment. He claimed to have barely known her, but witnesses reported hearing raised voices from inside her unit. Ananya's internet history showed searches for legal advice, harassment complaints, and questions about immigration risks. Despite these discoveries, no case was reopened. The label of suicide remained. Her family carried the weight of unanswered questions, insisting she had not simply given up. To some, her story became a warning about hidden struggles abroad. To others, it remained a haunting mystery, a young life lost in silence, with truth still locked away. On a cold December evening, the life Ananya Sharma had built in New York came to a sudden and tragic end. She was found lifeless in her modest apartment in Queens, a space she had carefully decorated with bits of home, posters of Bollywood films, sketches of fashion designs, and photographs of her family. For the police who entered the room, it appeared to be a clear case of suicide. The lights were off, the curtains drawn, and the stillness in the apartment was heavy. There was no farewell note, no diary entry to explain her state of mind, and no signs of forced entry. To outsiders, it seemed straightforward: another young life lost to the pressures of living alone in a foreign land. The news spread quickly. Within hours, it was reported in local New York papers, and by the next morning, it had reached India. Headlines carried phrases like "Indian student found dead in New York," and social media platforms were flooded with condolences and questions. For people who had seen her bright photos on Instagram just weeks earlier, the news felt unreal. Her friends back home were in disbelief, scrolling through her old posts, searching for any clue they might have missed, some sign of distress that had been hidden behind her curated smiles. The neighbors in her building added small pieces to the puzzle. Some mentioned hearing muffled sounds late that night, perhaps a thud or raised voices, but they had dismissed it, thinking it was the usual noise of city apartments. One neighbor recalled seeing her return home earlier in the evening carrying groceries, appearing calm and ordinary. No one imagined that only hours later, her life would end. Her family in Delhi was shattered by the news. They refused to believe the official statement that Ananya had taken her own life. To them, she had always been strong-willed and hopeful, even during challenges. She had dreams that were still unfinished, and she had often spoken of the future she was planning. The idea that she would end everything without leaving a word for the people she loved most was unbearable. They questioned the speed with which the authorities labeled the case a suicide and demanded a deeper investigation. Despite their protests, the case was quickly wrapped up. The police treated it as routine, citing the lack of evidence for foul play. Ananya's belongings were boxed up, and the apartment was soon cleared, erasing the traces of her presence. But the story did not fade away. Online forums, student groups, and even some community organizations began to discuss the unsettling details. Why was there no note? Why had she stopped contacting her family so regularly in the months before? Why did neighbors hear unusual noises that were never fully explained? Instead of bringing closure, her death opened more questions. For those who knew her, it became a mystery that would not rest. For her family, it was the beginning of a fight to uncover the truth behind the silence that surrounded her final night. When investigators took a closer look into Ananya's life, what they uncovered painted a very different picture from the smiling photographs her friends remembered. Living in New York had not been the glamorous experience many imagined. While her scholarship covered her tuition fees, it did not include the enormous cost of rent, food, and transport. To survive, she juggled 2 part-time jobs, working in a cafe during mornings and assisting at a small boutique in the evenings. The long hours left her exhausted, yet her paycheck barely stretched far enough. Bills stacked up on her small desk, unopened envelopes with reminders of overdue payments. It became clear that financial strain was one of the hidden battles she fought in silence. Her laptop and phone provided further insights into the pressures she carried. Emails revealed a disturbing pattern, repeated messages from an unknown account filled with threats and warnings. The words were vague but intimidating, hinting at someone who seemed to know her movements and her struggles. Some messages suggested she owed money, while others accused her of ruining someone's life. Investigators could not identify who the sender was, but the tone suggested control, manipulation, and fear. It was no longer possible to view her case as a simple matter of depression or stress. Her bank records added another layer of mystery. Alongside her regular transactions, there were several large cash withdrawals over the past few months. No one knew why she needed that money or where it went. She had never spoken about lending money to friends, nor was she known for spending lavishly. The withdrawals appeared deliberate, done at different ATMs across the city, often late at night. It raised the possibility that someone was pressuring her into handing over money, and if so, the question remained, who? Ananya's classmates described her as quiet and focused. She rarely joined parties or social gatherings, claiming she needed to save both time and money. But one classmate recalled her breaking down in the library once, whispering that she felt trapped. At the time, no one pressed for details, assuming it was exam stress. Now, in the shadow of her death, those words seemed like a desperate cry for help that had gone unheard. The more the investigators pieced together, the clearer it became that Ananya had been living 2 lives. Outwardly, she was a young woman chasing her dream of becoming a designer. Inwardly, she was under immense pressure, financially, emotionally, and perhaps even through someone's deliberate intimidation. The neatness of her apartment at the time of her death now appeared strange. For someone so overwhelmed, why had there been no letter, no scattered signs of chaos, nothing to explain her final act? These discoveries shifted the case away from the simplicity of a suicide. Instead, it began to look like the tragic outcome of hidden struggles and possible coercion. Her silence in those final months now seemed heavy with meaning, suggesting she was caught in something far larger than what anyone around her had imagined. The closer the investigation moved toward Ananya's final days, the more a name began to appear in fragments of her life: David Miller. He was a man in his late 30s, known in professional circles as a consultant who often attended art and fashion networking events. Ananya had first encountered him at one such gathering during her early months in New York. At first, there was nothing unusual about their connection. He appeared helpful, offering her advice on career opportunities and introducing her to a few people in the industry. To a young student far from home, he seemed like a guiding figure. But what started as casual interactions slowly turned into a link she could not easily break away from. Phone records showed that David and Ananya had spoken frequently during the weeks leading up to her death. Yet when questioned, David claimed he barely knew her, insisting he had only met her once or twice. His words contradicted the digital trail left behind. More suspiciously, CCTV footage from her building captured him entering late at night just 2 days before she died. He did not appear on the visitor log, which meant he had likely bypassed security procedures, perhaps by following someone in. He was seen leaving an hour later, looking hurried, his face partially hidden under a cap. Neighbors recalled vague memories of heated arguments coming from her apartment around that time, though none could confirm the details. The voices were muffled, the language unfamiliar to some, but the tension was clear. Despite this, no complaint was ever filed by Ananya. Her internet history, however, revealed something she had been researching: legal advice about harassment, rights of international students, and what to do if someone was threatening her with immigration consequences. This painted a grim possibility that David may have been using her visa status as leverage to control her. Investigators also discovered that many of the large cash withdrawals from her account coincided with dates when David's phone records showed calls to her. This pattern hinted that she might have been giving him money under pressure, though proof remained elusive. Without concrete evidence, suspicion could not easily turn into action. Still, the puzzle pieces began to form a disturbing picture of a relationship that was far from innocent. The most chilling discovery was her unfinished email draft, never sent. In it, she wrote about someone who wouldn't leave her alone and someone who knew too much. She stopped mid-sentence, leaving the message incomplete. Whether it referred to David or another person, no one could say for certain. But its existence added weight to the theory that her death was not entirely voluntary. Despite all these findings, David Miller faced no charges. His alibi was never fully broken, and he continued his life unaffected by the tragedy. For Ananya's family, however, his name became a shadow they could not escape. The suspicions surrounding him deepened the sense that their daughter's story was far more complicated than the official record suggested. Despite the many unanswered questions, the case surrounding Ananya Sharma's death was never reopened. The official report remained firm: suicide. With no conclusive evidence of foul play and no direct witness testimony, authorities in New York closed the file and moved on. For them, it was another tragic but routine case in a city where loneliness and stress often ended in silence. Yet for those who knew Ananya, the decision left a hollow ache, a sense that something important had been overlooked, or perhaps ignored. Her parents refused to accept the explanation. They spoke to journalists, wrote letters to officials, and pleaded for justice, but their voices faded in the noise of larger headlines. Each time they looked at her photographs, smiling in Times Square or holding her sketchbook proudly, they could not reconcile those images with the conclusion that she had chosen to end her own life. To them, she was still the daughter who had called home with excitement after her first day of classes, still the girl who dreamed of launching her own brand. The absence of a final note haunted them most. They believed no matter how much pain she felt, she would have left behind words for her family. Among students and young professionals, her story became a whispered warning. Many who had traveled abroad for studies saw themselves in her struggles, juggling rent, jobs, and academic pressure, all while far from the comfort of home. Some spoke of the fear that their own secrets, debts, or toxic relationships could someday consume them in the same way. Ananya's name carried a weight, reminding them that success abroad often hid invisible sacrifices. In New York, her apartment was quickly cleared, the walls stripped of her sketches and personal touches. A new tenant moved in months later, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded there. Yet within the Indian community, the story continued to echo. Every gathering, every discussion about students abroad, eventually circled back. People debated endlessly: was she truly a victim of her own despair, or had she been pushed toward an end she could not escape? Fragments of evidence lingered, frustratingly incomplete. The threatening emails, the large withdrawals, the CCTV footage of David Miller entering her building, the unfinished email draft, none of it was enough to break through the official conclusion. To some, this suggested a deeper silence, a reluctance to disturb the neat closure of a suicide verdict. To others, it was simply the tragic reality of a system that required certainty, not suspicion. What remained was a story without resolution, a mystery that ended not with answers but with shadows. Her family carried the burden of doubt, her friends replayed her final weeks in their minds, and strangers who read about her wondered how much of the truth had been lost in the quiet closing of her file. Whether Ananya's death was truly her choice or the result of hidden pressures, no one could say for certain. And that uncertainty became the most haunting detail of all, leaving her story suspended between fact and silence, between tragedy and crime, between truth and the questions that may never be answered.